You know that feeling when you wake up, not because your alarm went off or the sun hit your face, but because the air in your own bedroom tastes like you're sucking on a tailpipe, that thick, oily diesel taste that coats the back of your throat? That was my Tuesday, 5:45 a.m., waking up in the house my late wife and I built with our own hands, choking on black smoke because 6 massive, drum-turning concrete mixers were idling right on my private property, shaking the walls of my bedroom like a low-grade earthquake in the Nevada desert. I stumbled to the window, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Just this wall of industrial steel blocking the sunrise. Tires the size of me crushing the gravel driveway I'd raked the night before, completely boxing in my garage, and, more importantly, trapping my daughter Maya inside the house with absolutely no way to get her wheelchair-accessible van out for her physical therapy. I threw on my boots, my heart already hammering against my ribs, not just from the anger, but from the panic of it. Because I'm Caleb Reed. I'm a landscape architect. I know what 40 tons of rolling steel does to underground PVC piping, and I knew right then that the custom irrigation system Elena and I had installed, the one thing keeping our 5 acres of desert oasis alive, was getting pulverized into plastic confetti beneath those wheels. I storm out there, the desert heat already rising, and standing right in the middle of this chaos, holding a clipboard like a shield and wearing a smile so bright and fake it could strip paint, was Veronica Sterling, the HOA president and the owner of Sterling Development, a woman who treats the entire neighborhood of Whispering Pines like her personal monopoly board. She sees me coming, looking like a wreck in my bathrobe, and she doesn't even flinch, just flashes that shark-like grin and says, "Oh, good morning, Caleb. Sorry about the noise, sweetie. We're just staging the trucks here for the clubhouse renovation. It's a bit tight on the main road, so I figured you wouldn't mind helping the community out." And the way she said community made it sound like a threat, like if I objected, I was the enemy of the people. I looked at the trucks, then at my crushed Xeriscaping, and I told her, "This is private property. Veronica, you're crushing my main lines and you've blocked my daughter in. Get them off." But she just laughed, that dismissive little titter that rich folks do when they think you're cute for trying to have rights, and she says, "Relax, honey. It's perfectly within the HOA bylaws for temporary utility access. Don't be dramatic. It's just for a few days." A few days turned into a week, and I realized this wasn't about a renovation. This was an invasion, because Veronica had realized that my corner lot was the bottleneck, the only flat access point to the new luxury condos she was building on the ridge behind us. And instead of paying for a proper access road, she decided to turn Caleb Reed's driveway into her personal industrial highway. I'm a guy who values precision. I spent 30 years designing water systems where a single degree of incline changes everything. But my life had been in a free fall since Elena passed away 2 years ago from ovarian cancer, leaving me with a mountain of medical debt, a teenage daughter who needed special care, and a broken heart that only found peace when I was out in the yard, tending to the desert willow and sage we'd planted together. The noise became constant, starting at dawn, the hiss-break hiss of heavy machinery, the backup beepers piercing my brain like needles, and I watched helplessly as Maya missed 3 therapy sessions because we literally couldn't leave our house, trapped by a rotating lineup of excavators and flatbeds that Veronica was parking there because, as I found out later, she was too cheap to pay for off-site equipment storage. I tried to be reasonable. I really did. I went to her office trailer, which was parked comfortably in the shade of the community center, and I begged her. I literally swallowed my pride and told her, "Veronica, please, the vibration is cracking my drywall. The dust is triggering Maya's asthma. Just move the staging area to the empty lot on the north side." And she didn't even look up from her phone, just waved a hand at me and said, "That lot is for future development. Caleb, I can't have heavy equipment ruining the soil compactions there. You understand, right? We all have to make sacrifices for property values." She was protecting dirt she hadn't even built on yet while destroying the home I was fighting to keep. And that's when I realized she didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as an obstacle, a broke widower who could be bullied into submission because she knew about the liens on my house. She knew I couldn't afford a high-powered lawyer to fight her, so she just kept pushing. The breaking point, or at least the first one, was when I came home from a landscaping job. One of the few I managed to get to by walking 2 miles to where a friend picked me up, and found concrete dust, that alkaline, gray poison, coating everything Elena had loved. The leaves of her prize-winning rose bushes turned gray and suffocating, the air thick with it. I did some digging, because that's what desperate people do. I stayed up late while Maya slept, scouring the county records, looking for anything to stop her, and I found out Veronica wasn't just using my land. She was renting it out, actually charging third-party contractors a convenience fee to park on my driveway, turning my home into an illegal commercial truck stop and pocketing the cash while my property value tanked. I tried the police, but Officer Jenkins, a young guy who looked like he was 12, just shrugged and said, "Sir, this looks like a civil dispute involving an HOA easement. We can't get involved unless there's violence. You'll have to take it up with the board." But the board was Veronica. She was the judge, jury, and executioner of Whispering Pines, and she knew she was untouchable. I felt small. Like the world was just grinding me down, erasing the life Elena and I had built, until one evening, Maya, who's smarter than me by a mile, was doing a civics project on property rights, and she looked at the truck logs I'd been keeping and said, "Dad, look at the schedule. She's rotating them. She's running a logistics hub." And seeing my daughter, who had lost her mother and her mobility, looking at me with those expectant eyes, waiting for me to fix it, something in me snapped, but in a cold way, not a hot way. I went out the next morning, the air still cool before the desert sun hit, and I saw a crew ripping up the edge of my lawn, pouring hot asphalt right over the corner where Elena had planted a small circle of wildflowers, a memorial garden where I used to sit and talk to her in the evenings. I ran over there, shouting, "What are you doing? Stop." And the foreman, a guy named Rick, just spit on the ground and said, "Work order from Sterling, pal, widening the turn radius, take it up with her." And I watched, paralyzed, as black, smoking tar smothered the last living thing my wife had touched, the heat killing the roots instantly. And just like that, the sadness in my chest turned into something hard, something hydraulic, something like pressure building in a capped pipe. Veronica walked up, sipping an iced latte, and saw me staring at the smoking ruin of the garden, and she had the audacity to sigh and say, "Oh, don't look so tragic, Caleb. It was just weeds. We'll plant some nice uniform hedges there. It'll look much cleaner." And right then, looking at her flawless, unbothered face, I knew I wasn't going to sue her. I wasn't going to argue with her anymore. I was going to destroy her, because she had made the mistake of thinking I was just a gardener, forgetting that a landscape architect understands one thing better than anyone else: how to control the flow and how to shut it off. The death of the wildflower garden changed the atmosphere in the house. It was like the ghosts of our happiness had finally packed up and left, leaving Maya and me in this silent, dusty war zone where the enemy had keys to the gate and the moral high ground of community improvement. Veronica escalated the campaign, almost like she could smell my resistance, sending me daily violation notices for unsightly debris, which was actually the dust her trucks were kicking up, and she even started spreading rumors at the community pool that I was losing my mind from grief, telling the neighbors, "Poor Caleb, he's just not stable since Elena passed. He's become so paranoid about the construction. I'm worried for Maya," effectively isolating me so that when I walked down the street, people didn't wave, they looked away. But grief does funny things to a man's focus. It strips away the distractions, and while Veronica thought I was wallowing, I was hunting, digging through 20 years of paperwork in the attic, looking for the original survey maps from when we bought the land back in the 90s, before Sterling Development even existed. I found it at 2 a.m. on a Thursday, a yellowing document tucked inside an old tax folder, a declaration of covenants from 1988, and attached to it was a survey map that showed the easement Veronica was claiming. The right-of-way for utility access had a sunset clause, a tiny paragraph written in legalese that said the easement expired if the adjacent lot remained undeveloped for 20 years, which it had, until Veronica bought it 6 months ago. I took it to an old friend of mine, Attorney Holloway, a shark of a lawyer who hated HOAs almost as much as he hated losing. And he looked at the paper, then looked at me, and a slow grin spread across his face as he whispered, "Caleb, this isn't just an expired easement. This is a prescriptive lapse, meant that legally, for the last 3 weeks, every single one of those trucks has been trespassing, and technically, you have the right to secure your perimeter." Secure my perimeter. The words tasted sweeter than wine, and I went home and looked at my driveway. realizing I didn't just own the land. I owned the choke point, the only way in or out for her massive project. And if I closed it, her entire operation would choke to death. I cashed out the last of my 401k, the money I was saving for a rainy day, because it was pouring right now, and I hired a specialized fencing crew, guys who install security for impound lots, and I told them I needed a gate, not a decorative picket fence, but a crash-rated, hydraulic steel barrier that could stop a tank, something that looked industrial and terrifying. We installed it overnight on a Thursday, working under floodlights, sinking the steel posts 6 feet into the concrete, wiring the hydraulic arm to a remote system I could control from my phone, and by Friday morning, 2 massive, gray steel leaves stood open at the end of my driveway, looking like the entrance to a fortress. Veronica saw it the next morning and marched over, her face tight, waving another violation slip, screaming, "This monstrosity is not approved. You have 24 hours to take this down, or I'm fining you $1,000 a day." And I just stood there, leaning against the cold steel, and said, "Veronica, you can fine me whatever you want, but this is for my daughter's safety. You said I was unstable, right? Well, I'm just securing my property." And she huffed, rolling her eyes. "Fine. Keep your ugly gate. Just make sure it stays open for the concrete pour today. We have 10 trucks coming and I don't have time for your tantrums." And I nodded, saying, "Oh, don't worry. The gate will be exactly where it needs to be." She didn't know that I had spent the night researching concrete curing times, learning that once the water hits the mix in those rotating drums, you have exactly 90 minutes to pour it before it starts to undergo a chemical reaction, hardening into a solid, unmovable rock that ruins the drum and costs about 30 grand per truck to fix, not to mention the cost of the wasted material. Maya was the one who set up the cameras, positioning GoPros in the cactus garden and on the roof, streaming directly to a cloud server, because we knew Veronica would lie, we knew she would play the victim, and we needed the world to see the truth in high definition. Friday at noon, the convoy arrived, a parade of destruction, 8 massive mixers rumbling down the street, shaking the ground, hauling wet concrete for the foundation of Veronica's new luxury clubhouse, a project she had leveraged everything on, counting on a fast completion to pay off her investors. I watched from the kitchen window, sipping coffee, my hand hovering over the tablet that controlled the gate, waiting until the first 3 trucks were fully onto my property, their engines roaring, the drivers oblivious to the fact that they had just driven into a trap laid by a man they thought was broken. I waited until Veronica drove her Mercedes past them, parking right near my garage to supervise, clipboard in hand, looking like the queen of the desert, checking her watch, yelling at the guys to hurry up because the heat was rising and concrete sets faster in the sun. I looked at Maya. She gave me a thumbs up, her face pale but determined, and I tapped the screen, the close button turning from gray to red. Outside, the hydraulics whined, a sound like a jet engine starting up, and those massive steel gates swung shut with a clang that echoed across the valley, locking into place with a magnetic seal that would take a blowtorch to cut through. The lead driver slammed on his brakes, staring at the sudden wall of steel, and behind him, the other trucks crunched to a halt, trapped between my garage and the gate, boxed in, nowhere to go, while the drums kept spinning, ticking down the seconds to disaster. The panic was immediate and absolutely delicious to watch, unfolding like a slow-motion car crash where the only casualty was Veronica's bank account. The lead driver hopped out of his cab, banging his fist on the steel slats of the gate, screaming into his radio, while Veronica looked around in confusion before her eyes locked onto me standing on the porch, and her face went from annoyed to a shade of red I'd never seen on a human being. She sprinted over, her heels sinking into the gravel she'd refused to pave, shrieking, "Caleb, open this gate right now. You are interfering with a commercial operation. Open it." I didn't yell back. I didn't get angry. I just held up the copy of the 1988 deed and spoke calmly, knowing the cameras were picking up every word. "Veronica, according to this deed and the expired easement, these trucks are trespassing on private land, and I'm exercising my right to deny entry. You're welcome to back them out, but the gate stays closed." But she couldn't back them out. That was the beauty of it, because she had stacked them so tight in my driveway that the rear trucks were blocking the street, and the ones inside had no turning radius. They were stuck in a metal conga line of my design. You don't understand, she screamed, spit flying from her mouth. That concrete is hot. It's going to set in 40 minutes. If they don't pour, the loads are ruined. You're looking at $100,000 in damages, and I just looked at the spot where Elena's wildflowers used to be, now just a patch of black asphalt. And I said, well, Veronica, that sounds like poor logistical planning on your part. Maybe you should have checked the survey maps. The drivers were frantic now, speeding up the rotation of the drums to keep the mix from hardening, revving their engines, filling the air with smoke, creating a scene so chaotic that the neighbors started coming out of their houses. People who had been ignoring me for months now standing on the sidewalk, phones out, filming the spectacle. Veronica called the police, screaming that I was holding people hostage, and when Officer Miller, a retired deputy who lived 2 streets over, pulled up, she ran to him, playing the damsel, crying, "Arrest him. He's crazy. He's trapped us." But Miller wasn't the young rookie from before. He was a guy who knew the law, and he walked over to me, looked at the deed I handed him, looked at the gate, and then looked back at Veronica. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "this is private property, and he has a valid gate permit. If your trucks are on his land without a current easement, that's criminal trespass. I can't force him to open it." Veronica gasped, "But the concrete, it's hardening," and Miller just shrugged. "Then I suggest you ask him nicely, or call a tow truck, but that's a civil matter." They asked him nicely part never happened because Veronica was incapable of humility. So she spent the next hour screaming threats while the sound of the mixers changed, the wet slosh turning into a heavy, grinding thud as the concrete began to solidify inside the drums. It was the sound of justice, the sound of irreversible consequences. By the time a tow truck finally arrived to clear the street, it was too late. The drums had seized up. Those 3 trucks were effectively totaled, filled with 20 tons of rock that would have to be jackhammered out by hand. A mistake that I later learned cost Sterling Development nearly $250,000 in equipment damage and breach of contract fees. The fallout was spectacular. The video Maya posted went viral overnight, titled, "HOA Karen Parks in Wrong Driveway." And the comments section destroyed Veronica's reputation faster than the concrete destroyed her trucks. The investors pulled out of the condo project when the news of the easement dispute came out, realizing she didn't have legal access to the build site. She resigned from the board in disgrace 2 weeks later, fleeing the neighborhood to avoid the lawsuits from the trucking company. I used the settlement money. Yes, she sued me, and I countersued and won massive damages for the property destruction and emotional distress, to rip up the asphalt and replant Elena's garden, making it twice as big, a sanctuary of color in the middle of the desert. Sitting there now, watching the sunset hit the new hydraulic gate that protects my peace, I think about Elena and how she always said kindness was a choice, but so is survival. Veronica thought she could pave over my life because she had the money and the title, but she forgot that even the hardest concrete cracks if the ground beneath it shifts. I defended my home, my daughter, and my wife's memory, and I don't regret a single second of it. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? At what point does turning the other cheek just mean you're making it easier for them to slap you again? Did I go too far costing them that much money? Or was it the only language a bully like that would ever understand? You tell me.